Duran Premium Cigars, one of the fastest-growing boutique cigar companies, provides smokers a portal into the old Cuban tradition of the perfect balance and the lost art of progressive flavor construction. Roberto Pelayo Duran began his career in tobacco over 2 decades ago in Havana, where his reputation grew within Cuban circles. The creation of Duran Premium Cigars has given Roberto the platform to introduce a series of cigars that offer the quality and construction that he perfected while in Cuba. Brands include the ultra-premium Roberto P. Duran signature line, Azan, Nea, and Baracoa. Duran uses a seed to humidor approach, as all of their tobacco is grown in their farms and rolled in their factory in Esteli, Nicaragua. Rollers have been carefully chosen to carry out Roberto's precise method to ensure progressive flavor in each cigar. Duran Premium Cigars invites you to make their premium your standard.
Hey, Paul, what's up?
What's up, Mark?
Did you hear about the new cigar that's coming out?
Which one is that? There's like 800 new ones every week.
The one with the Connecticut broadleaf wrapper.
Oh, really? I love Connecticut broadleaf. Who makes it?
I think it's Nicaraguan.
So Nicaraguan binder and filler, or it's made in a factory in Nicaragua?
I always have to Google these, and it's taking me like an hour to find out what it is.
If this is a frequent conversation with your cigar buddies, look no further than Stogie Geeks News, the only cigar news podcast on the internet. Will Cooper, the man behind cigar-coop.com, and Paul Asadorian from the Stogie Geeks produce a weekly show covering the latest cigar news, new blends, cigar manufacturer announcements, and more. Subscribe to the video version on YouTube, or get the audio version in your favorite podcast catcher. Head on over to stogienews.tv to subscribe today.
Welcome back, everyone, to a Stogie Geeks Hot Topics. We need to find a new name for this segment, Will. I don't know what happened when I was out, but all of a sudden we started with Hot Pockets or Hot Topics or whatever we're calling this thing.
Well, what happened was we needed to fill in something for the unbanded.
I totally get it. Get it.
So I was a little bit, and we wanted to have a segment because, and we had the unbanded distributed. So this kind of evolved because there's been so many very polarizing stories that have been hitting lately.
I agree. And it was, I don't know how, it was Facebook how I found out about this particular news item, and then I started reading a little bit about it. And I was saying before the show, actually when Omar was still on, unfortunately he's not with us to have this conversation, because we were actually having a really good conversation about it. And I said, the politics today is so polarizing and so emotional, to put it lightly, right? But what I've been doing lately is really reading about what's happening in politics and current affairs today, and trying to relate the facts back to what we want to convey and the messages we want to convey in the show that relates to our audience that, in my computer security network as relates to computer security. And there's a lot of news that's very pertinent, right, to what's going to potentially impact the information security field. And here in cigars, it's the same thing. There's a lot of news and a lot of changes to the political climate here in the U.S. that could shape the cigar industry, that could shape regulations. And we have to be very in tune with that without going off on this, whole like polarizing, very emotional and opinionated route in politics. So,
right.
I think your segments are very important, Will, and very timely. My only nitpick is just we might change the name moving into 2017, call it something different other than Hot Topics, although it is very descriptive of what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Of course, Fidel Castro has passed away at the age of 90. And I, too, thought it was interesting. While I didn't see a lot of it firsthand, I heard about it more secondhand of people that were, confused about what this means. And everything that we know, and certainly all the cigar industry people watching and listening to this show and who've been on this show have a very strong opinion about the government in Cuba and Fidel Castro himself, because their families and themselves have been impacted by it largely in a negative way. I mean, let's face facts. When Fidel came into power, what I read was there was over 400 people assassinated for whatever reason. And, I mean, that just, reeks of a dictatorship, and that's, of course, the way many of us feel in the cigar industry who are friends with people who are from Cuba, whose families came from Cuba. I saw posts about if my grandparents could only see this day, and I think it's very telling of the kind of climate right now. There are other people who I think in the media and on social media just kind of read the headlines and just want to jump on a bandwagon and be like, oh, it's so sad Fidel Castro passed away. And I'm like, look, let's educate ourselves. Let's read the facts, understand history before you start posting things that other people are going to read, which I think is just really is really sad. And I think it's really with the passing of Fidel, right? I've really kind of been opened up even more to how ignorant some people are about what's happened in history that is fact with the country of Cuba. And Will, you just having visited Cuba more recently can speak to that better really than anyone on this panel.
Yeah, I took a lot of crap from people in the industry. Some were good about the crap they gave me. Some were not as good about it. But the important thing is, I didn't go there to see the Castros.
Right.
So that was the first important thing to note. I went there to kind of learn about it. But when I went there, when I've gone to other countries, like I've gone to Nicaragua, I've connected. I never connected with the people I met on the ground in Cuba like I did down there. And you knew that there was a part of them that they don't like what's going on there. They want a better life, but they had this positive spin, and they're just great people. That's something that I understand there's going to be this embargo topic, and the relation's going to be something coming up. But I kind of hope from a selfish standpoint, I want to continue to make connections with the people I met on the ground down there.
I think there's a lot of life lessons, and of course, Kruk is asking the burning question, the elephant in the room. Did you see what Obama said about Fidel, and did you see what Trump said about Fidel? And yes,
yeah,
I did. I read both statements. Absolutely, yeah. They are, I believe, on two polar opposite ends of the spectrum. I don't necessarily agree or think that each of them are the most productive thing. Knowing what I know about the culture of Cuba, being friends with everyone in the cigar industry, I don't think anyone's either historically right or wrong in everything that they said. I think they're just in two completely different camps as what they believe about the issues, right? I do think that there needs to be some more middle ground, right? And as I was describing for the show, there's we can just go bomb countries, and there's we can go be friends with everyone, right? Obviously, right. I think politics falls somewhere in between, and I don't necessarily agree with either of those views in their extremes. I think there's always a middle ground, and I think that being in business as long as I have, you have to understand the politics and understand that extremes tend to have some kind of negative consequence, right? I think that Obama giving condolences to the Castro family is one extreme, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think having the view of all negative comments and all negativity isn't necessarily the view that I agree with either. I think it's somewhere in between. I think there's merits in both of those in some way. If you tone them down a little bit, I think that I like what Stace said before the show. It's we want to get countries such as Cuba kind of in line with us and friendly with us, so they adopt our form of democracy and become better in our own image. I also think that we just don't want to make enemies in the world either. Now, let me say this. I'm not taking away from the horrible things that Fidel Castro and the government has done over the years. I think those are atrocities. I just think we need to deal with them in a way that is going to better everyone. Certainly, maybe someday better this industry, although that remains to be seen with the embargo. I don't think we're going to see huge changes anytime soon. But, I don't know. Having come from, I'm Armenian, and there's certainly political aspects of my history and culture that, I can identify with. And I think those can't be ignored. And sometimes people make statements and people believe, they might be ignoring their history or past or their feelings, and that's not right either. So I think it's a certainly delicate situation. I like to see us. I don't know what you guys think the future is with our relations with Cuba. I don't think it should be all rainbows and unicorns, but I also don't think we should be like dropping bombs and having all negativity, I guess is my point. Where do you guys?
One of my thoughts is it's much bigger than any of us here, right? So my feeling is that Cuba has had a run for decades, right? So when the iconic figure passes, there's hope, right? And so in my mind, it's not going to be solved overnight, but I would like to think, being the optimistic person that I am, the glass is half full, that Cuba's best days are ahead of them, not behind them, right?
Yeah,
and
I think the same thing.
I agree.
And I don't know how we get from where we are now to lifting an embargo so that not just cigars, right? I mean, they produce sugar, they produce coffee, they do an awful rum, they do a lot of stuff, right? It's not just cigar centric, but selfishly on the cigar angle, everybody's chomping at the bit, not just to get the Cuban cigars on the shelves of the retailers, but to allow everybody else, the Padrones, the Davidoffs, the My Fathers, everybody else to have another spice to work with, right? To build a blend using tobacco that is, grown and sourced outside of Cuba, I think is an exciting thing.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think we're going to see a roadmap. I don't, look, I think that the leverage right now, that the U.S. has some leverage right now, that they've opened the door with Cuba. And believe it or not, I think the new president's in a better position right now to maybe get some of the things they want to see out of Cuba because they've opened up some of these things. And that the Cuban people have really being on the ground there firsthand, they have really taken to the American tourists coming in. They are really happy to see this. So, and you mentioned earlier, Castro, I'm not using this word in a positive way. He was that iconic figure. He was the figure we associated with the revolution. Yeah. Not so much Raul. I'm not saying Raul is a great person by any means, but we looked at that. Castro was the evil emperor, so to speak. I'm not defending Raul, but some things since Raul took over were loosened up a bit there. Folks are now allowed to leave Cuba a little more freely. There's some private businesses that have now been established. The taxi cabs are private businesses down there. The farms are private businesses.
It's funny, Will. It's funny that you say that, and I was so glad when you went to Cuba and brought back information firsthand. And some of the feedback that came to me through friends and family was like, well, the Castros are dictators, and none of the people that live in Cuba can work or make any money on their own. They're all provided for by the government. And I was able to quickly correct and say, well, no, actually, in the past, recent past in Cuba, they have enabled people to be a little more independent and have some of their own businesses, and that's some of the reforms that have happened in Cuba. Now, does that mean that 100% positive things are always happening in the country? No, but it is a fact, like you said, Will, that there are cigar industry that people have some of their own farms and able to have their own business, that the taxi cabs can now somewhat have some of their own business. Right. So that is a positive change. Right. That doesn't take away from any of the negative things that are happening. Like, I'm sure you still need a permit to speak in public about the government in Cuba as well in a designated spot. So there are civil rights violations that are still occurring there, but
you don't have private internet. Yeah, you don't have private internet. Yeah. But also I want to kind of paint the picture that, look, there is private business, but it's still very much controlled by the government. So, for example, with the farms, they are owned, the farms are owned privately, but they have to sell a large percentage of that product to the government at the price the government wants to pay. Right. So it's not there yet. Right. But there have been steps that have been taken that weren't there 30 years ago. So I'm trying to kind of look at the glass half full here, is what I'm saying. But now, like I said, I think with the new president, he's in an opportunity here where, okay, if we want to get some of these atrocities corrected there, we have some leverage now that the window's been opened here, and that can be used to our advantage. Rather than, I don't think Donald Trump's going to pull everything back on this. I think he's going to look at this carefully and, like you said, negotiate, make a deal. And I think that's what we're going to start to see with that. Whether the deal works or not, I can't say.
Yeah, I think that the new president, who right now is obviously Donald Trump, needs to make the decision. What's happened during the Obama administration with relation to Cuba, is that good for everyone? Is that going to be a positive change? And if Trump and his administration makes that decision, and we read more facts that indicate that, yeah, it could have positive impacts and keep things moving in a positive direction, then that's great. I think we feel the same way. And again, these are feelings, right? Because we don't have a whole lot of facts to go on about Trump as it relates to the regulation of the cigar industry. And I think the Trump administration is going to make the same kind of judgments. However, in both cases, as it relates to relationship with Cuba, regulation of the cigar industry, there's really no one, and that's why we're a democracy, right? There's no one person or even one office that can really make decisions that actually change things, because many of the decisions that can actually change something have to go through Congress, right? They have to go through the Senate. They have to go through the House. There's a voting process that has to take place from multiple different people with multiple perspectives, as well as any other decisions that involve the Supreme Court. Like, there's this wonderful system that we have. And yes, there are things that the president can do in his or her power. There are things that certain appointments by Trump can do to affect things, but to make major changes, there has to be a vote, has to go through lots of different people. So we have to take that into consideration with respects to, example, right? Lifting the embargo. That's not something that the president can do. It's not something the president can appoint someone to do. It's something that has to be voted on in Congress. It's the same thing with FDA, correct me if I'm wrong, to have any real change in a sweeping manner would require a vote? No? In some way, shape, form, or fashion, right? It would require a vote. Right.
Yeah, you can't repeal the regulation. So the regulation is a law. So the only way you can repeal a law is to introduce a bill to repeal that law.
Correct.
There are certain things a president can do to mitigate a few things through executive action. But no, the regulation will not be undone with that.
But while the regulation won't be undone, one of the hopes with the new administration is targeting that predicate date, right?
We hope. I mean, and I know we've talked a lot on the show about the optimism. I've said it's a lot of the Rudy Giuliani story. Just I still see it out there. I don't get it because I think there's going to be, I don't know how this is going to, I mean, we all love cigars.
Well, no, here's the thing. I can speak somewhat intelligently about the Rudy Giuliani thing because it has crossover into my other podcast. The general consensus as of last week before we broke for Thanksgiving was that Rudy Giuliani is in his primary consideration for a position in the Trump administration is Director of National Intelligence. What that position entails is really communication between intelligence agencies and the communication of intelligence agencies to the administration of the president, so the office of the president and his advisors. And that is a very critical role in cybersecurity because much of what happens in the intelligence industry or circles is really related to cyber. I don't think it has really any bearing on what's going to happen with FDA regulation. So yes, while Rudy Giuliani may be all for cigars, the position from what I've read that's been reported, and again, this is just basing on what I've read, is that he is the likely candidate for Director of National Intelligence. Now, my opinion, I think he's very well suited for that role. I think he showed as the mayor of New York City and the time through September 11th. and just in general, he's very well suited to that role, to communication of intelligence efforts. I think it's a great role for Rudy Giuliani. Don't get me wrong. In my estimation, from what my opinion, it has absolutely no bearing on the FDA ruling with respects to cigars.
Right. And if Rudy Giuliani was up for Secretary of Health and Human Services, I may be singing a different tune on this.
Right.
but that's where I'm kind of going with this.
And it's the Marco Rubio thing. I mean, I don't know if Marco Rubio was up for any kind of position.
He was up for re-election. He ran for re-election.
Okay, but he's not looking for a position in the Trump administration necessarily. I
haven't seen anything on the ground with that.
No, he's pro cigars, and that's whatever. But again, I don't see any bearing there either, based on what you said.
I've been very critical of Rubio and Giuliani because we already regulated. I don't feel they took especially Marco Rubio. I know he sponsored a bill, but nothing got done with this thing in Congress in 6 years.
Well, and don't forget, too, I mean, Rudy was the mayor of New York, and New York City has some of the most strict cigar regulations as well. So most of that happened, though, after when Bloomberg came in. I mean, you're right. It did happen with Bloomberg. Yes, you're right.
There was some anti-smoking stuff that was passed, though, under Giuliani, but it wasn't to the degree that, I think people could have lived with the things that happened with Giuliani. Some of the separation of,
Giuliani was probably the smoking ban in restaurants during his administration, right?
But it became, with Bloomberg, he took it to another level where he tried to basically
ban outdoor smoking. That was the big thing in New York.
Ban outdoor smoking.
Keep it out of the parks, keep it everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, he's tried for more prohibitionary tactics, which Giuliani didn't take that approach. I think he was trying to console a non-smoking community at the time with that.
Yep. All right. So, anything else on the hot top? I know Kruk is probably he is all over.
It's Kruk. I hope I didn't upset him. I love the guy.
He said he's agreed with you, and I can't digest all of it without in a really uncomfortable pause with me reading his comments. So.
I love Kruk.
We love Kruk. Kruk, you're awesome.
Family.
You're awesome, Kruk.
One of the things that I was looking at when Castro's passing happened on Friday night, spent some time just digging into Cuba and the cigars, etc. And one interesting nugget that I came across, verified it through Wikipedia, so I'm hoping it's somewhat accurate. But Habanos SA, the entity that distributes the Cuban cigars, is owned 50% by the governing body that owns Altadas.
Yes.
So in terms of, do we have things in place that could help speed along if we get to that, wonderful place that we're hoping it goes to, I think we've got things there that will help speed that along.
Yeah, I mean, that will help once they come in, there will be distribution set up.
Right.
I got to tell this one other story. I haven't told, I don't think I told Stace this. I may have, but I didn't tell you this, Paul. So, on Friday night, I was up in New York on vacation for Thanksgiving. I'm in a hotel room. I went to sleep early, right? And basically, my phone starts dinging about 12:30 at night, right? And it wakes me up and my wife up. Now, Stace and a bunch of friends we know, they are the worst text message guys in the world. And all I kept thinking
till wee hours in the morning.
Yeah, and all I kept thinking is, oh, here they go again, right? And finally, when I looked at it, it was basically everyone from the cigar industry saying, did I know what happened? Did I know what happened? And I didn't. I ended up waking up out of bed, going downstairs to have a cigar in the patio, and kind of just get on top of it. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I think it was interesting news for the cigar industry because so many people in the cigar industry are very close to the issue. So,
yeah.
Interesting times that we live in. Those are good hot topics. We're going to take a short break. Come back and talk about our stogies for this week.